introductions? All right, seeing none, we will move on to the bill that is before us today. I do have a few questions before we begin. My paper says I have 3 oral testimonies. Could you raise your hand if you are present and plan to testify? So there is just 3. The rest are written. Okay, we need to know that for time's sake. All right. This time we will begin with Jason. Will you be giving the overview? Jason Long to give the overview of Senate Bill 325.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Senate Bill 325 deals with county ordinances and the siting of certain renewable energy facilities. You do have a memo at your chair summarizing Senate Bill 325. I will direct your attention to page 2 of the bill under the definition of facility. This is an electric generation facility consisting of 1 or more wind turbines or a solar energy system to generate electrical power. And so we're talking about wind turbines and solar energy panel systems as these facilities. The bill does 2 things. First, in a new section of law that on and after July 1st of this year, any developer that is wanting to construct these facilities on land in the county must have the appropriate building permit or conditional use permit issued by the county before it can be constructed, and the land on which the facility is to be constructed has to be zoned for industrial use. And so those 2 conditions have to be met before the developer can commence construction of the facility. That section also provides a protest petition. So if at least 10% or more of the qualified electors of the county on those rezoned parcels that are rezoned for industrial use, or on land that is contiguous to the parcels that have been rezoned for industrial use, sign on to this protest petition, they can protest the Board of County Commissioners' decision to rezone the land for industrial use for the purpose. And if that goes to an election and the voters vote in favor of reversing the rezoning of the land, then the board is prohibited from adopting any such resolution for at least the next 4 years to rezone that land for industrial use. The other part of Senate Bill 325 is an amendment to the statute regarding recording of real estate instruments by the Register of Deeds at each county. You see on page 3 of the bill, there's a new subsection B added on to this statute. This pertains solely to leases and easements involving wind or solar resources and technology to produce and generate electricity. So these are very specific lease and easement documents that a developer would enter into with a landowner for the placement of one of these renewable energy facilities. The conditions for recording such leases and easements are spelled out there on page 3. They would need to first have the required building permit or conditional use permit issued by the county, and they would need to submit that to the Register of Deeds along with the lease or the easement document. They have to do the recording within 30 days of execution of the lease or easement, so it's timely, and the recording has to disclose the registered company name and any trade names of the grantee or the operator of that lease or easement of that renewable energy facility. And so all 3 of those conditions must be met. If they are not met, or if the instrument is fraudulently recorded, then the developer will be prohibited from recording any subsequent lease or easement involving wind or solar resources on that same property. So 2 different provisions there, one regarding the rezoning of land for the placement of these facilities, and the other some recording requirements for leases and easements to site these facilities on property in the county. The bill will go into effect on July 1st of this year, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Jason, do we have a problem with fraudulent recordings? Is that something that typically
I am
happens?
not aware of any particular instances, but we could certainly look into that issue and see if there have been.
Well, maybe it'll come up during testimony.
Might.
Okay. Any questions for Jason? Senator Dahl.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Jason. Of the 105 counties, how many are zoned currently?
I don't have that precise number off the top of my head. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay, I'd like that number.
Okay.
And secondly, while you're doing that, I'd like to know how much this unfunded mandate would be on each county that are not zoned at this time. Thank you.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Jason, my reading of this is the restrictions on requirements for zoning industrial would apply for any industrial use, not just the wind or solar. So if Douglas County wants to build their pretzel factory and they need to rezone property for that, that could be affected by the same requirements to have a resolution, and then that could be undone, right?
So reading subsection B standing alone, you could read those protest petitions as potentially applying to any rezoning of land for industrial activity. Reading the section as a whole, though, with the definitions and subsection A, it would appear to be more consistent to read subsection B as only applying to a rezoning of land for the purpose of constructing the facilities that are defined under section 1. And so that's an issue of statutory interpretation. One way would be to read it all as one cohesive statute only applying to these particular facilities when you're rezoning the land use, and not to say a rezoning for industrial use for some other unrelated facility.
Thank you. I might have some suggestions on that to make sure it can't not be misinterpreted.
It could be clarified, yes.
Other questions? Yes, Senator Bragman.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I guess my question, it kind of dovetails off the Senator Dove. The ones that are existing, let's just say a windmill that's not zoned, will this affect them? Would they have to go back and get zoning, and they already have it on there or anything like that? Thank you.
No, page 1, line 12 says this is only applicable on and after July 1st of 2022. So only on the effective date, looking prospectively. We wouldn't retroactively require any compliance.
Other questions? All right, thank you, Jason. At this time, we'll start the oral testimony. It appears that we have 3 people. So because we have 3, you may have up to 10 minutes. Please don't feel obligated to use the 10 minutes if you don't need it. After 10 minutes, you will be cut off because, believe it or not, you may have some legislators that might like to ask you some questions before you leave town. So at this time, we'll recognize Senator Mike Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Vice Chair Bowers, Ranking Minority Francisco, and committee members. I'm here in support of Senate Bill 325, and let me kind of clarify why. There's been a need for quite some time for transparency and protection of some of the landowners out in the rural areas of the state that have been affected by the institution, primarily wind, but we're going to see more and more solar facilities coming in as part of the Evergy Sustainable Transformation Plan. The reason for this, and I've seen it in action out in the rural communities, and by the way, Senator Dahl, is about half of the counties are unzoned in the state. I don't have the exact number, it's about half. Specifically, a lot of these companies, like the wind and solar, have been targeting the unzoned counties for a particular reason. It's kind of no man's land out there. They've been utilizing tactics that are secretive to obtain land leases. We've got about 3,500 turbines out there right now. So we've seen these practices in action. In fact, I've been in communities like Marysville, Seneca, Sabetha, Mountain City, Fort Scott, and some of the outlying areas have been directly impacted by this. And what's happening is the wind companies in particular, I'm not sure about the solar companies, but we're seeing that some in Johnson County, are going and collecting these land leases. The leases that they've had largely have had gag orders, so that you might sign a land lease. You can't talk to your neighbor about that. You're prevented from doing so on this lease. They do that, and then they hold these leases for a long period of time, sometimes up to and over a year, until they collect enough of these land leases. Then they will go to the county commission in these unzoned counties. A lot of times there's only 3 county commissioners. They will say, listen, we've got these leases in place, in hand. You need to give us either a special use permit, or if a county is zoned, rezone this for industrial use so we can put in these large turbines. And I've heard of situations in numerous counties where if they don't capitulate, they're actually intimidated by using the threat of a lawsuit. These counties don't have the financial wherewithal to fight these lawsuits, so a lot of times they'll capitulate. And then that information gets out to the community, the rural people who will be directly impacted by these turbines, who are now 600 feet tall, by the way. This building is only about 325 feet tall. So go outside, look at the top of the rotunda. Imagine a turbine twice that height sitting right next door, 1,500 feet from your house. And this is happening in a lot of these rural communities. This is a turbine that's capable of throwing ice 3,250 feet. A turbine where if the blade disintegrates, chunks of that turbine blade can fly onto your property where your children are playing. It disturbs your ability to enjoy your own property. Your property rights, or a property right of somebody who signs these leases right next door to you, do not end at their property. If you are imposing a health and safety risk on your neighbors, that's a big deal. And those property rights have not been considered with regard to how these things have been cited. And I realize there's some other issues with regard to the Department of Defense. There's an amendment coming that I've been working with them on. They need to know about the siting of these wind turbines. And basically what we want to do is provide some transparency in the process. We want the people who are near a proposed wind farm installation or solar installation to know. So the reason we're requiring the leases to be filed in 30 days is so it becomes public record. File the lease, your neighbors can find out, okay, we've got something come in, they can find out and talk to the county commission about it. It provides a transparency. And then in a lot of these communities where I've spoken and met with these people, there are hundreds of residents at these meetings, and they are upset because they didn't know about these facilities coming in, and they want to have a say about the setbacks, about the safety rules and things like that. And these smaller counties have just been overwhelmed by this. And I've seen it enough that it's become disturbing to me, and I think it's time that we do something. I think this bill certainly is a way to do it. With regard to the concerns about honing it in narrowly on the industrial facilities, I think that's a good suggestion. I'll work with the revisor to make that amendment so it's very clear that it's a solar or a wind installation. And I just think that it's time to do something about it. Again, back in 2001, we only had about 57 turbines in the state. We have 3,500. More are proposed, a lot more solar facilities, which take up huge amounts of land. It affects land values and the ability to people to sell their property or enjoy their property. And I think Senate Bill 325 is a necessary step in that regard. So with that, you've had my written testimony. I'll stand for questions, certainly. But I want to give the other proponents time to speak. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes.
We will have questions later, but I have a quick one for you.
Okay.
Have you been able to get your hand on a contract that talks about how they have a gag order?
I have one in my
have
office. I do. I've seen multiple, a number of these leases, and they put that in there for a purpose, and that is so they can, as much as they can, gather these leases secretly. And you have to realize, if you've ever gone out to one of these facilities, they don't sign them up contiguously. A lot of times it'll be a patchwork. One person will sign a lease here, one person will sign a lease there. Somebody in the middle may, the wind company will come and say, hey, do you want to sign a lease? They'll say no. And some people end up surrounded by these turbines with flashing lights, the noise, the health issues. So it's really having a major impact on the rural counties, and unfortunately, it's something that goes ignored. But that's why we need to create transparency. We're not saying we can't do these facilities. We're just saying these communities are being so severely impacted that they need to know about it and at least have a chance to negotiate or push back and say, if we're going to do this, let's do it in a common sense fashion, not place these things right next door to people where I've heard stories of people who've had to move because of the noise and the impact on their family. The turbines can have, up in Wisconsin, stray voltage that caused dairy cows to dry up. The wildlife vacates the area, the deer, everything, they don't like it. And there are environmental hazards as well. So we need a common sense approach. We've already got a lot of these things, and there are more coming. And so I think this bill answers that, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll have more questions. Thank you
Okay,
for your
thank you.
testimony. Next, we have Deborah Kramer. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Committee, I consider it an honor to live in this state and to be before you this morning.
Try to stay as close as you can to
Yeah,
the
thank you.
mic. Thank you, so that everybody can hear it on WebEx.
Thank you. I became involved with wind energy last spring when Lebec County Commissioners began to hold town hall-style meetings concerning RWE Renewables' proposed wind development. After a few meetings, word through the grapevine was RWE already had properties leased near Mound Valley. And to my surprise, a records management report from the county courthouse from the Register of Deeds provided it was true and shockingly revealed that nearly 18,000 acres was already leased to RWE. A moratorium had been put in place on commercial wind farm, and it was passed in November 2019. Yet the report showed that the first lease filed by RWE was signed only days later. That meant that they had been working in our county long before we knew. Commissioners had not had adequate time to check the potential impact of the development, as a moratorium had made mention of. Brandon Hernandez, the wind developer for RWE, had assured us through the press that they would not even know if we had wind energy available until September of 21. But Matt Tullis, a communications manager for RWE, shed some light as to why the early leasing was happening, and he said to the Kansas City Star, and I'm going to quote him, "There are several studies that must be completed to ensure the project's viability, but private landowners have already begun signing leasing agreements as is standard practice." A compelling question began. It arose. Why was early leasing agreements for wind development a standard practice? Being a government employee for the state of Kansas through the county, I started looking. I started checking with other counties. And I looked into the scope of this, and I learned that it played an important role for wind developers. And I found that this was just not a Lebec County, southeast Kansas problem. This is a state of Kansas issue. Leasing practice without regulatory permission allows a developer to come into a county and lease as early as they choose. They lease where they decide, as long as it's not unzoned. And they lease in areas they should never be allowed to lease in because there's no laws. And they can hold leases, so you don't even know they have leases, as there's no law in the state of Kansas that tells them they have to file a lease. And leasing can be done without giving any notice to county officials or to non-participating landowners like me. Once you find out, you're put in a defense, such as a countermeasure that involves defending the health and the well-being of oneself from harm. A defense to protect yourself for your landowner and your private property rights, especially if the county and the city you live in has conflicts of interest and are on the same page as wind energy. And I use the word same page as wind energy because a wise attorney said before the courts in Kansas that when wind energy and the county are on the same page, the petitioners are inadequately protected. Across our state, wind developers have for nearly 20 years used leasing before regulatory permission to their advantage, giving the developer an early foothold into a county while building a base of supporting landowners to position the landowners to uphold landowner and private property rights, which allows leverage at the county for approval and in the courts if there's opposition. Zimmerman versus the Board of Wabunsee County Commissioners is an example in our Kansas Supreme Court. For those who leased land development and they went to court to uphold their landowner rights and their private property rights. And wind energy came right along as interveners for the owners of wind rights. The same happened in Reno County, when NextEra and 69 landowners who had previous leases went to court with the county when they denied the conditional use permit. The intentional signing of leasing agreements before regulatory approval has aided wind development across and expand to Kansas, and the senator just made reference to that. And it needs to be stopped. Committee, it needs to be stopped to safeguard the county and the state of Kansas and to protect non-leasing residents like myself. But also we need safeguard. We need statewide setback distances established to make sure that we're safe when county commissioners and city council are on the same page as wind developers, which is what happened in our area. Lebec County had 2 commissioners on the same page as wind energy. Commissioner Kinsey, who has now been recalled, and Cole Perot ended up with a coma violation from a phone conversation that took place and RWE was mentioned. 3 days later, Commissioner Cole introduced the following setbacks, and Commissioner Kinsey approved them. The other commissioner had no idea this was happening. They set 16 feet from a non-participating residence, a turbine can be placed, 1 mile from an incorporated town. Protecting residents in incorporated towns 5,280 feet from turbines, and the residents in unincorporated towns and the rural residents 1,600 feet is not fair and equitable. Bartlett, Kansas, in our county, is an unincorporated town where a USD 506 grade school is located. You will notice in my testimony, I have made maps of these working with a state-certified cartographer. You will see the distances. The school is located 30 feet from the city property, meaning 1,630 feet would be all that they would be granted. That's unsafe for our kiddos. Now, you would think that RWE Renewables, knowing the risk associated with turbines, having wind projects established in Texas and Oklahoma for our safety and out of respect for our community, would have considered setbacks and not lease land in certain areas. But with no state laws to keep them from doing so, they leased bordering 3 of our smaller cities where we had no zoning, and near 2 of our USD 506 grade schools. They leased on 2 sides of our Altamont City Lake, on 3 sides of the Kansas State experiment land, as close as across the road, near the hunting and the fishing areas of the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks and Tourism, and near our Big Hill Lake. The Audubon Society had asked for protection for waterfowl. I'm asking you to look at all of these agents and consider them in protection also. Look at the testimony. In my testimony, there's an aerial picture of Mound Valley. A resident of Mound Valley leased 1,479 acres with RWE. 159 acres borders the city on the west, about half of the length, as close as 875 feet at one point from our grade school. A second tract borders the north of town, as closest to our ballpark. Our city leaders, with the mayor on the same page of the wind energy, and family members on the council related to this resident, chose not to adopt any setback distances or regulations. We need the state's help here. You're dealing with communities where everybody knows everybody and very little bit about wind energy. So I ask you to come up with regulations and guidelines that are both equitable and fair statewide, and consider our safety and health above all. If I still have time, let me make this one last point of what's happening. Going back to my compelling question, when I ask as to the leasing standard practice and why they were so important, I begin to understand after studying them all over the state. Using Wabaunsee County as an example, landowners who have leased now with RWE in Lebec County can uphold their landowner and their private property rights in court if Lebec County Commissioners should deny development. And RWE will come along as interveners, the owners of wind rights, should litigation be necessary. And the landowners have an incentive to do so in the form of money. According to RWE's article in the Kansas City Star, landowners with 200 acres leased and a turbine will earn between $9,000 and $15,000 a year. Landowners that does not end up with a turbine could make as much as $6,000. I have provided you a copy of a lease. I can provide you all of the documents that I have. If you will look at that lease, there is 3 dates on it. The date that's filed at the courthouse, the date it's signed with the notary, and the date that it goes into effect. From the time that goes in effect, as far as I can understand, that's the date they start getting paid. Commissioner Cole is already using the possibility of litigation from the landowner's contract as leverage to push other commissioners into RWE development. Absolutely, I think it would be unfair, not only for Lebec County and other counties, but also to our state, if this is not aggressively addressed. I can tell you from being a county employee in both Labette and Montgomery, of knowing Southeast Kansas very well because I did appraisal work. What happens there is our counties usually have a 3-mile zone around the larger cities. That's very typical for Montgomery, Labette, Neosho. So just because the city has zoning in your numbers, make sure that you understand that that zoning usually just affects the larger cities. So we have like Coffeyville, Independence, Parsons, Erie's, those would have your zoning protections. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Deborah. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Chairman McGinn and members of the Senate Committee on Local Government. My name is Don Lager, and I'm speaking to you today as an ag landowner and on behalf of the Northeast Kansas Concerned Citizens group of over 800 people. I live in the country near the little community of St. Benedict in Nemaha County, Kansas. St. Mary's Catholic Church, located in St. Benedict, is on both the Kansas and the National Registers of Historic Places and is also recognized as one of the 8 wonders of Kansas art. We bring in a lot of people tourism-wise to that little church. I can't imagine a multitude of 500-foot-tall industrial wind turbines surrounding this beautiful church and small community, which is unincorporated, by the way. But it is quite possible. You see, there's already ground leased for industrial wind turbines within 1 mile of St. Benedict. And this is exactly what happened to Corning, Kansas. Corning is located in the southern half of Nemaha County. NextEra's Soldier Creek Wind Project of 120 turbines surrounds Corning. 50 of those turbines are within 3 miles in all directions. 50 turbines, 500 feet tall. As mentioned, the Capitol building is about 325 feet tall. 50 turbines, 500 feet tall, within 3 miles. Corning tried to take action to keep turbines outside the 3 miles around their town. They tried, but they were beat down, and it has torn their community apart. Hopefully you have heard or will hear their story. I believe you may have some testimonies from them. It's simply disgusting what happened to them. But let me give you some statistics about the Soldier Creek Industrial Wind Project. As I've already said, that project has 120 wind turbines. There are approximately 192 different leased or participating landowners and approximately 176 non-participating landowners. There were 103 participating residences and 143 non-participating residences within the wind project footprint. These numbers do not include the people who live in the communities of Corning and Gulf or within 1 mile of those communities. In simple terms, 60% of the people who live in the rural areas included in the Soldier Creek Industrial Wind Project are non-participants. Let me say that again, 60% who live in the project are non-participants. With the county commissioners, or when the county commissioners finally produced documents about the Soldier Creek project, in about 10 days' time, there were around 1,350 signed petitions requesting minimum setbacks from non-participating residences and property lines, or an outright prohibition of industrial wind. Later that month, in April of 2019, the commissioners conducted 2 public hearings regarding this project. There were very large crowds at both hearings, and about 85% of those attending and commenting spoke in opposition to industrial wind turbines or wanted significant setbacks if the project was allowed to move forward. You had to be, I'm sorry, deaf, blind, or just plain stupid to not recognize the opposition was huge. Despite this opposition, the then sitting commissioners moved forward and approve the project. Were there folks who wanted turbines? Of course. Were there folks who didn't want the turbines? Absolutely. In our case, it didn't matter that the majority didn't want them. Why do I say that? Because Nemaha County didn't have zoning. Without zoning, it is basically left up to 3 people to decide, the commissioners. And there's not time for recalls or electing somebody out of office, because within 3 months after we were made aware of the extent of this project, the project was approved, and immediately the project started. 3 people. 2 of those commissioners, the only 2 up for election, were soundly defeated at the next election, primarily because they did not listen to the people. But the county now has 120 industrial windmills, wind turbines. In addition, wind companies continue to sign landowners in hopes of cramming through another project. Does this bill require a county to adopt zoning if they don't want to? No. Does it keep a county from adopting zoning? No. Local control is important. The control still resides with the county. Industrial wind turbine or industrial solar projects are simply that, industrial. Calling them wind farms or solar farms is disingenuous. They are industrial. That is basically what this bill does, acknowledges them as industrial. If a county, after going through the processes of hearing from their citizens, welcomes industrial wind or solar projects or welcomes them under certain conditions, then they can do so. Nothing stops them from doing so. If a county does not want wind or solar projects, then they don't have to adopt zoning to protect them. The Kansas Livestock Association recently stated their position on behalf of their 5,600 members. The KLA members support legislation to protect the property rights of landowners adjoining but not participating in wind farm developments. I am an agricultural landowner in Nemaha County. I witnessed firsthand what happened in Nemaha County, and I can confirm what Mrs. Kramer and what Senator Thompson described. It happened in Nemaha County. There was the approval of 120 wind turbines in the southern half of our county. My son and his family are hoping to build a house on a quarter of section of land that we own. To think that a 500-foot tall turbine could be constructed 600 feet from our property line and 2,000 feet from the new home is frightening. Property rights are important, but to think that placing a turbine that close isn't infringing on our property rights is ludicrous. Something has got to change. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of Senate Bill 325. For the many non-participants who want their property rights protected and basically have virtually no way to have their voice heard, please give this bill further consideration.
Thank you, Don Lager, for being here today. Is there anyone else that did show up to testify in person? Committee, please note that we have written testimony from Ann Dare, Melissa Warner, Shirley Estrada, Margaret Stewart, Beverly Cavaras, Brian Coover, and Diane Novak. At this time, committee, are there any questions for our conferee? Senator Dahl.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is for Senator Thompson. Why is solar in this bill? Because everything we've talked about, the boogeyman, does not apply to solar.
Do I need to go to the podium, Madam Chair?
If you guys are all comfortable, I think we can just have this, as long as it's only to you.
Yeah, because we're seeing more and more transition to solar and it uses huge amounts of land. The wind turbines they are intrusive. There are health and safety risks with it. There are other risks that comes with solar. There are polyfluoroalkyl that are used in the construction of the solar panels that leach into the groundwater. Those are carcinogens. The solar installations, the industrial solar installations, not the rooftop stuff, take up hundreds of acres of land, don't produce that much electricity, but they do impact the landowners around them in terms of land value, ability to, people may or may not want to live around those. They do affect aircraft. That's why the DOD has an amendment for this bill that impacts that, because of the glint and glare off of the solar facilities. And it increases the temperature of the area. It does impact agriculture as well. So there are a lot of unseen things that go along with these facilities that the average person who doesn't have to live by them or consider them until all of a sudden it's being forced upon them, don't think about. And I think this just gives us the opportunity to give the people in the community a say about it. Like Mr. Lugar pointed out, it's not saying a county can't do that. It's just saying it gives them a little time to consider. And let me kind of also bring up about the wind turbines. Something that large, or something called trespass zoning, you have the fact that the health and safety risks don't stop at a person's property line or a city's property line is a big deal. And we talk a lot, you'll hear probably from the opponents of this bill about property rights and the ability to do whatever you want to do with your land. But never have I seen in this state in the last 3 years when I've been involved with this stuff, anybody talking about the property rights of the people who are having them installed next door. And it's a big, big problem. It would be the same as saying, I want to shoot my gun at your property, but the bullet just magically stops at the property line. It's a health and safety risk, and the solar provides, also brings maybe not as much as the wind turbines, but it certainly comes with some risk, and people are being, placed in a situation where their property value is going to go down.
Senator Dahl, do you have any follow-up?
Please. Thank you. First of all, I strongly disagree with lowering the value of property from the neighbors. I'm very familiar with solar farms and land values where I live and such. And secondly, you said in your testimony that wind farms are going after counties that are unzoned. My experience dealing with wind farms is that they're going where the transmission lines are. because there's a lot of our counties back home that want wind farms. So, that's just point. My question is, are you aware, you talked about ice lobs, I've heard about the ice lobs, or broken blades. Are you aware of any broken blades that have ever been thrown?
Yes, I can show you a video of it, YouTube video. Shows one disintegrating, and you wouldn't want to be
I
near it.
saw them disintegrate, catch on fire. I've never heard of a blade being thrown.
Well, that material has to go somewhere. It doesn't just disappear into thin air. That material
just
can be
fell
tossed.
straight
Yeah.
down and was on fire.
Apex, there was a study by Apex, which is a wind company. It did on ice throw, and its own document shows that ice can be tossed 3,250 feet. So if you're only 1,500 feet from a now the new turbines are going to be 600, 700, 800 feet tall. So I would imagine that ice throw is going to be increased. If you want a 2-pound chunk of ice being tossed at your house or your car or your cattle or your dog or your family, that's a consideration. That's a safety consideration. And it needs to be considered, but has not up until time because we've had no protection for these folks.
We're going to move on. Senator Fasquedo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for Ms. Deborah Kramer. Yes, please. You've given one of the best compelling testimonies that I've ever heard on the Senate Local Government Committee. You mentioned the City Council and County Commissioners. I was wondering, was there a public hearing prior
No,
to
our
this?
city,
and were you able to participate?
No, our city chose not to have a hearing or not to allow a hearing, and so there was no public. The county did, as I mentioned, that's how we even learned that this was coming. They held meetings, but by that time, as I said, 18,000 acres was already leased. I would like to share with you that I brought my actual documents from home, so I actually brought you copies of the actual documents that you can get. Anyone is available to go to every courthouse in the county, and you can ask for a report. And I showed you a copy of what that report looks like and how you could read it, and then you could look over it and you could understand the lease better. But I wanted to provide you actual documentation so that when I came before you, you would understand how I understood they were holding leases. And I began to call around to other counties. Being a data collector with the county and understanding county documents, it just bothered me.
Yeah. And I think you shared that in your testimony, and Madam Chair. Ms. Deborah, I'm curious, what's the makeup, the number of your county commissioners in your area?
We have
Thank you,
three.
Madam Chair.
We have three.
Three, okay.
And we for the first time, like I mentioned, the one was he was recalled, and so now it will be back before the other commission as if this gets to come in.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm wanting to focus on the changes that this bill is making. And my first question for Senator Thompson would be, we already had rules that applied to recording deeds for wind resources and technologies to produce and generate electricity. Why is it important that these be different from those rules for oil and gas leases?
Senator Thompson.
Because of the size of these turbines and the aerial extent, this is, like an oil well is, 20, 30 feet high. So it's not going to impose the same kind of health and safety risks that these massive turbines do. And the tactics that have been used, if there are requirements to record the deeds, they're certainly being circumvented. This, at least by requiring the recording of those leases, requires some transparency in the process. And it's been abused enough that it's time to do something about it. And that's the number one thing. As both the other oral conferees pointed out, there have been intimidation tactics. There have been just county commissioners that don't listen. We need a transparency in the process. It doesn't prevent the county from going that direction. You saw in Mr. Lugar's testimony, there are actually, in one county, more people who had signed up for the leases than did not. So if you have a debate in a community and you have the opportunity to know what's going on, then there's a better chance you're going to get some protections and you're not going to have this sort of thing coming to us at the state.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have some constituents who've been very concerned when they found out a oil well was being drilled right next to their garage. So and I don't know if this is, I mean, I guess this is a question for you as well, but wouldn't it be possible to get around these requirements for recording by having a contract with an individual to sign a lease and then wait and sign all the leases at one time and have them within that 30 days?
The problem with this, Senator, is they've been putting the cart before the horse. And they've been collecting these leases before there was even a special use permit or a zoning for one of these to put in. And then come to the county and say, we've got these land leases, we're asserting their property rights, and we're going to sue the county. So it's just the process has been abused. And because a lot of these counties are unzoned, it's like I said, it's sort of like the Wild West. There's no set standard for them to follow. A lot of these people have it sprung on them at the last moment. And it's just, I feel like at the state level, we need to set a base minimum standard for this to happen. And by the way, there's a much higher concentration of population in eastern Kansas and western Kansas. I think there's much more place for these things in western Kansas where you have larger sections of land and where it's not going to be as intrusive. But the farther east you go with a higher concentration of population and more densely populated area, that's where we're seeing a lot of these problems.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly, there's also a concern that electricity be generated somewhat close to where it's being used, and denser populations are using that electricity. So I'm also continuing, Madam Chair, to have concerns about this requirement that would really mean that every county has to be zoned. And I think it will be hard because if someone wants to come in with an industrial use, they're going to have to ask for zoning for industrial use. And you are not going to necessarily know what that business is. So it could be a wind farm, it could not. So all of a sudden, you're saying other uses may now be suspect.
Well, and I intend to clarify that on this bill and work with the revisor. I want to narrow the focus so that we're talking about the wind and the solar installations only, because I understand your concern with that regard. And the intent of this bill was to focus it on that, and we just need to clean up the language, and I promise I will work with the revisor on that section to make sure it's correct. And by the way, I did mention, I don't think they had oral testimony, but the Department of Defense also is in favor of this because they want to know where these are being placed because it impacts their aircraft. And so there's a lot of things to consider about it. It's just not the adjacent landowners, but the aircraft flying overhead as well.
Say on Thursday, did you have a final question?
Well, the final concern is if the land is already zoned for industrial use, then you won't have that that opportunity. And as we require counties to zone, it seems like they may want to have businesses. I don't know. I think we're creating some problems with zoning.
It does not force them to zone at all. If a county doesn't want to zone, they don't have to zone. They don't have to accept the wind turbines. The industrial zoning, if it's already in place, then they've already done the first step in this process, and that doesn't take away from that. It's just saying that we need to have some restrictions on where these are going, and either a zoning or a special use permit is a way to do that, not trying to limit the proliferation of industrial use stuff across the state, but just trying to protect these landowners who are directly and negatively impacted by it, and I understand your concern.
One final comment, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, it's just a concern that now we are telling property owners that they are limited into what they can do if their county isn't zoned.
Committee members, on Thursday, we will have the neutral testimony and proponents as well. Anything else to come before us? Seeing none, we are adjourned.